Carrere and Hastings designed some of the most iconic buildings in America, but the most revealing buildings John Carrere and Thomas Hastings ever created were the two they built for no client but themselves. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. For two men whose work would come to define American cities, they began about as far apart as two architects possibly could. John Carrere was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1858 into a prosperous family with a successful coffee trade. He was sent to Switzerland to be educated, polishing his French and his manners before winning a place at the most prestigious design academy on earth, l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where he studied in the studio of Léon Guénon. He settled in New York, where his family had relocated, and took a draftsman's job at the leading firm in the country, McKim, Mead & White. Now, Thomas Hastings was a New Yorker to his bones. He was born in the city in 1860 into a distinguished line of clergymen and musicians. He cut short his college preparations to work alongside the chief designer at Herder Brothers, the most fashionable decorating house in New York, then sailed for Paris and the École des Beaux-Arts, studying in the studio of Louis-Jules André and finishing his courses in 1884. Back in New York, he too joined McKim, Mead & White. The two men had already met once as students in Paris, where Carrere had recruited Hastings to help on a school design project. They struck up the friendship again in the corridors of McKim, Mead & White, and they hit it off so well that in 1885 they decided to set up on their own. Carrere was the organizer, the civic planner, the man who could marshal a vast project, and the city officials who came with it. Hastings was the inventive designer, the one with the restless pencil. Together they were better than either was alone. Their great break came, of all places, through a church connection. Henry Morrison Flagler, the Standard Oil partner who was beginning to pour his fortune into the development of Florida, moved in the same religious circles as the Hastings family, and the referral brought the untested young firm its first enormous commission. Flagler asked them to design the Hotel Ponce de Leon in St. Augustine, Florida, a sprawling Spanish Renaissance dream that announced two unknowns to the world. It was also a marvel of engineering for its day, one of the first major American buildings constructed of poured concrete, using the local coquina shell as aggregate, and among the earliest hotels in the country wired for electric light, with Thomas Edison himself consulting on the installation. Beneath the romantic Spanish costume, the planning was pure Paris. Every public room, guest wing, and service corridor arranged along a disciplined central axis. Flagler liked the results so much that he handed them the Hotel Alcazar across the street, a more eclectic confection drawing on Spanish, Italian, and Moorish themes, which survives today as the Leitner Museum. The Ponce de Leon now forms the heart of Flagler College. From those Florida triumphs, the work multiplied and the ambitions grew. In Richmond, the tobacco magnate Major Lewis Skinner brought them in to build the Jefferson Hotel, completed in 1895, an exuberant Renaissance Revival landmark whose interiors had to be partly rebuilt after a fire in 1901. They laid out and supervised the architecture of the Pan American Exposition of 1901 in Buffalo, with Carrere chairing its board of architects and steering the whole fair toward a richly colored Spanish Renaissance theme, a deliberate departure from the cool white classicism of the famous Chicago Fair of 1893. Then came the commission that crowned everything. In 1897, the still young firm won the competition to design the New York Public Library, beating, among others, their former employers at McKim, Mead & White. They built it on the side of the old Croton Reservoir at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, and they built it of Vermont marble in such quantity and to such an exacting standard that they rejected most of the stone the quarry sent them. The 5th Avenue front follows the five-part formula of a French palace, its central portico of three great arches recalling a Roman triumphal arch, and it is flanked by the two marble lions that every New Yorker now knows. The lions were originally named Leo Astor and Leo Lennox after the founding fortunes behind the library, until Mayor LaGuardia rechristened them Patience and Fortitude during the Great Depression for the qualities he thought the city needed to get through those years. Carrere and Hastings designed the building down to its smallest fittings, the lamps and the chairs and the doorknobs, and it opened in 1911. It remains one of the supreme achievements of American classicism. The portfolio kept widening into the kind of work that shapes a nation's capital and its skylines. In Washington, they designed the first office buildings for Congress, known today as the Russell Senate Office Building and the Cannon House Office Building, with Carrere taking the Senate side and Hastings the House. Their restrained classicism carefully pitched to sit in conversation with the Capitol itself. They designed the grand approaches and triumphal archway of the Manhattan Bridge, the standard oil building downtown, Flagler's White Marble Palace, Whitehall, and Palm Beach, and a long roster of opulent private residences for the richest titans of the Gilded Age. The profession recognized them early, awarding the firm the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal in 1903. And after Carrere was gone, Hastings completed the firm's other great Fifth Avenue masterpiece, the home of Henry Clay Frick. For Frick, Hastings reached back to the Parisian tradition of the private town palace, faced the house in Indiana limestone, set it behind a raised garden, and planned the rooms from the start around Frick's intention to leave the house and its paintings to the public. It opened as the Frick Collection in 1935. By the time the firm closed its doors, it had produced more than 600 buildings. But if you want to understand an architect and really get inside his head, the surest way is to look at the house he builds when the only client he has to please is himself. And here, the two partners diverge in the most revealing way. Two men shaped by identical training who reach for opposite ideas of what a personal home should be. John Carrere built first in New York City. Around 1901, the firm designed his own townhouse on East 65th Street, a few steps east of Park Avenue, in the years when that stretch of Manhattan was still a quarter of fine private mansions and row houses before the great tide of apartment construction swept most of them away. It was the home of a man at the height of his civic standing, an architect who sat on the city's art commissions and moved easily among the wealthy and the powerful, and the design reflected the same instincts that governed his public work: proportion, restraint, and a quiet confidence that did not need to shout. Where his hotels and his libraries were the grandeur openly, the house he made for himself spoke in a lower and more private register, the discipline of the Beaux-Arts brought down to the intimate scale of a family home. Unfortunately, there are no known surviving photos of the exterior of this house, and believe me, I've been searching for years, but that's not the case for our next house. Thomas Hastings took the opposite path for his personal home, and he took it out into the country. In 1908, he built a retreat at Old Westbury in the heart of the North Shore's emerging Gold Coast, and he gave it a name freighted with French meaning. He called it Bagatelle. Hundreds of craftsmen are said to have worked day and night to complete it in roughly 2 months, and the Count placed a Latin motto above the door that meant small but suitable. The word bagatelle itself means a trifle, a little nothing, an elegant small thing, and for an architect steeped in the French traditions, it was the perfect name for a country house that made a virtue of intimacy rather than overwhelming scale. Of course, this is still a mansion by any standard, but compared to the palaces he designed, it must have seemed relatively simple to Hastings. To give the house a larger appearance, he tucked a low stable with 4 box stalls into one end of the entrance court. The first version of the house was lost to fire, and Hastings rebuilt it, this time in steel and concrete rather than mostly wood, to essentially the same design as the original. The interior became in time everything you might expect of Hastings' work, with the grand staircase clad in Spanish hexagon tile and accented by a wrought iron balustrade with colorful tapestries draping down from a rustic coffered ceiling. The dining room continues this refined charm, with colorful ceiling murals broken up into different sections above wood-paneled walls and geometric textiles. Similarly, the library continued with wood-paneled walls, introducing built-in, glass-paned bookcases and Hastings desks set right in front of a floor-to-ceiling window. All the glass along the walls helped to bounce natural light around the room, leaving no need for overhead lighting in his working hours. Each room became a kind of showpiece of his innovations and aesthetic preferences, blending Chippendale with a bit of Adam in the dressing room. Set the two houses side by side, and they become a kind of double portrait. Carrere, born abroad and raised across Europe, built himself a restrained and elegant house in the heart of the city and kept his grandeur for his clients. Hastings, the New York minister's son, built a French-named villa in the country whose whole genius lay in elegant control of how a person moved throughout it. Unfortunately, their partnership ended with terrible sadness. On the night of March 1st, 1911, Carrere was riding home in a taxicab after dinner when the cab swerved to avoid an oncoming streetcar. He was thrown from the vehicle and passed away a few months later from the complications of his injuries. Hastings carried the firm alone for nearly 2 decades, keeping its name and his place at its head while increasingly sharing the load on the largest jobs with trusted associates such as Theodore Blake and Richmond Shreve. That collaborative habit had a long afterlife, for Shreve would go on to help found the firm that designed the Empire State Building. In his years as the surviving partner, Hastings produced some of his most famous work, including the Frick Mansion, the Victory Arch in Madison Square, and the Memorial Amphitheatre at Arlington National Cemetery, along with major buildings in London. Because he outlived Carrère by so long and wrote and lectured so widely on behalf of classical architecture, he is often remembered as the firm's leading light. He passed away in 1929, following an operation for appendicitis. He left his wife, but no heirs, and with his death, the firm of Carrere and Hastings came to its end. For half a century afterward, as architectural fashion turned hard toward modernism, the partners' reputation faded before later generations restored them to the rightful place among the most important American architects of their era. Bagatelle still stands in Old Westbury, lived in as a private home. Carrere's townhouse, however, was not so fortunate, and fell to the wave of commercialization that took over the neighborhood. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Which house did you like better? Let me know down below in the comments section, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.